They laughed when you moved different. They mocked your silence, your patience, your strange way of thinking. But while they were busy judging you, you were studying the game from the shadows. Now the same people who called you insane are watching their perfect little system crack under pressure. Every move you make creates panic. Every step forward exposes their weakness. They thought chaos would destroy you, but chaos became your weapon. You stopped chasing approval and started mastering power. And that's what scares them most. Because once a person turns pain into strategy, the entire world starts shaking when they enter the room. They laughed at you long before they feared you. Every strange idea you spoke, every move you made, every moment you chose silence over validation became entertainment for people who could only understand what looked normal. They thought being different meant being broken. They believed anyone who refused to follow the crowd had to be lost, unstable, or insane. But the truth is, weak minds always attack what they cannot predict. People feel comfortable around copies because copies never threaten the system. Originals do. You notice things others ignored. You questioned rules nobody dared to challenge. While everyone else chased attention, you studied behavior. While they wasted time trying to fit in, you were learning how the entire game worked behind the scenes. That alone made people uncomfortable. Most humans are terrified of deep thinkers because deep thinkers expose illusions. The moment you stop blindly accepting everything around you, you become dangerous to people who built their identity around lies. So they mocked you. Not because you were weak, but because your presence reminded them how limited they really were. Every joke they made was a defense mechanism. Every insult was fear wearing a fake smile. They wanted you to doubt yourself because confidence in someone unique feels threatening to people who spent their whole life copying trends, following crowds, and begging for approval. They could not understand why you stayed calm while being isolated. They could not understand how you kept moving without validation. They could not understand why rejection never completely destroyed you. That's because your vision was bigger than their opinions. Most people only see what exists today. You saw what could exist tomorrow. That's why they misunderstood your silence. They thought you were weak because you stopped explaining yourself. In reality, you simply realized that average minds rarely understand uncommon ambition. Explaining greatness to closed-minded people is like explaining fire to someone who has lived in darkness forever. They don't deny it because it's false. They deny it because accepting it would force them to question their own limitations, and that terrified them. You became the mirror they tried to avoid. Your discipline exposed their excuses. Your patience exposed their emotional weakness. Your ability to stand alone exposed how dependent they were on acceptance. Every time you survived another betrayal, another setback, another season of isolation, you unknowingly became stronger than the system designed to break you. They thought pressure would crush your spirit, but pressure sharpened your mind instead. That's when the energy changed. The same people who laughed started watching in silence. The same people who ignored you suddenly studied your moves. Why? Because results speak a language mockery cannot silence forever. Eventually, consistency becomes impossible to deny. Eventually, even your enemies are forced to respect what they once insulted. And nothing confuses people more than watching someone they underestimated rise beyond their reach. Now they replay your old moments differently in their head. They remember the things you said. They remember the confidence you carried when nobody supported you. They remember how you kept building while everyone else wasted years chasing distractions. Suddenly, the crazy person does not look so crazy anymore. That is the funniest part of all this. People only call vision insanity until it starts working. History has always repeated this pattern. The world laughs first, doubts second, watches third, then copies last. But by the time they finally understand your mindset, you are already 10 steps ahead. Because while they spent years mocking what they could not understand, you spent those same years evolving into something they can no longer control. There comes a moment when a person realizes that explaining themselves to everyone is a waste of energy. You reached that moment after seeing how people twist words, misunderstand intentions, and use vulnerability as entertainment. So instead of arguing, proving, and reacting to every attack, you became silent. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you finally understood that silence carries more power than unnecessary noise. Ever will. At first they mistook your silence for weakness. They thought you were intimidated. They assumed you had no response. In a world addicted to attention and constant reactions, calmness confuses people. Most individuals expose their emotions instantly. They reveal their plans too early. They talk too much, react too fast, and give enemies a complete map to their mind. But you stop doing that. You learn that mystery creates pressure. The less people know about your next move, the more nervous they become. Your silence forced people to guess, and people fear what they cannot read. While others wasted energy trying to look powerful, you quietly built real strength behind the scenes. You stopped announcing your goals. You stopped seeking approval for your ideas. You stopped responding to every insult thrown your way. Instead, you observed everything carefully. You watched patterns. You studied behavior. You learned who switched sides under pressure and who only appeared loyal when life was easy. Silence gave you information that emotions could never provide. That's the dangerous thing about a silent person. Everyone thinks nothing is happening until the results appear. People underestimated you because you stopped performing for the crowd. They expected emotional reactions and dramatic outbursts, but you denied them that satisfaction. Every time they tried provoking you and received nothing in return, frustration grew inside them. Silence became psychological, warfare without you even trying. Your calm energy forced insecure people to expose themselves. They kept talking while you kept learning. They kept underestimating while you kept evolving. The truth is, silence sharpens awareness. When you stop speaking all the time, you begin noticing details others completely miss. You hear the hidden jealousy behind fake compliments. You notice fear hidden inside arrogance. You recognize manipulation before it fully appears. Silence trained your instincts. It transformed you from reactive into strategic. Instead of fighting every battle emotionally, you started choosing your moments carefully. And that level of control terrifies people who depend on chaos to feel powerful. Most people reveal themselves through unnecessary talking. Their ego forces them to constantly prove something. But you learn that real power does not beg to be noticed. Real power moves quietly. A lion does not announce every step before hunting. A storm does not ask permission before arriving. And the most dangerous minds in history were never the loudest people in the room. They were the calm observers sitting quietly while everyone else underestimated them. That became your advantage. Your silence created distance between you and distractions. It protected your focus. While others chased validation online, argued over meaningless opinions, and wasted years trying to impress strangers, you were building discipline in private. You were strengthening your mindset while nobody paid attention. And that is why your growth shocked people later. They thought you disappeared. In reality, you were transforming. Now your silence feels heavy when you enter a room. People sense something different about you even when you say nothing. Your energy speaks before your words ever do. They can feel the self-control. They can feel the patience. They can feel the pressure of someone who no longer needs external approval to feel important. And that changes everything. Because once silence becomes your weapon, people lose access to your emotions. They lose the ability to predict you. They lose control over your reactions. And when people can no longer manipulate your mind, they start fearing your presence instead. From the very beginning, you were never designed to think like everyone else. Even when you tried to blend in, something inside you kept questioning everything around you. You noticed how people followed trends without understanding them. You saw how fear controlled decisions, how society rewarded obedience more than intelligence, and how most individuals sacrificed their identity just to avoid standing alone. While others accepted the system exactly as it was, your mind naturally searched for what existed behind the curtain. That made you different immediately. Independent thinkers have always made systems uncomfortable because systems survive through predictability. They want people who repeat, obey, consume, and never question deeper truths. The moment someone begins thinking independently, control starts weakening. And that is why people reacted strangely to you long before you understood your own power. They sensed something unpredictable in your energy. You were not easy to influence. You did not blindly accept popular opinions. You were willing to walk alone if it meant protecting your vision. Most people cannot do that. The average person fears rejection more than losing themselves. They silence their real thoughts to fit into groups that never truly value them. But your mind kept resisting that pressure. Even when you stayed quiet, you were analyzing everything. You noticed manipulation hidden inside entertainment. You recognized fake authority disguised as wisdom. You saw how many people live their entire lives trapped inside mental cages built by fear, trends, and social conditioning. And once you see those patterns, you can never fully unsee them. That is when the system begins fearing you, not because you are violent, not because you seek destruction, but because independent minds inspire other people to wake up too. One person refusing to blindly follow creates tension. One person questioning the rules forces others to think for themselves. Systems built on control cannot comfortably exist around people who value truth more than approval. So they tried labeling you instead. Crazy, difficult, arrogant, delusional, dangerous. History always uses those words against people who think beyond normal limits. Society often attacks visionaries before celebrating them later. Why? Because independent thinking threatens comfortable illusions. Most people would rather protect a familiar lie than face an uncomfortable truth. And when someone like you appears someone calm enough to stand outside the crowd, without begging for acceptance, it exposes how deeply dependent others are on validation. That exposure creates fear. People started realizing they could not control your direction through shame. Mockery stopped working. Peer pressure stopped working. Fear tactics stopped working. Every time they expected you to surrender your individuality, you became even more mentally disciplined instead. Isolation strengthened you. Rejection sharpened your awareness. Betrayal taught you who truly deserved access to your energy. Without realizing it, you became mentally free. And freedom terrifies systems built on emotional dependence. You stopped needing constant approval. You stopped chasing the permission to become yourself. You stopped shrinking your thoughts just to make insecure people comfortable. That kind of transformation changes the way you move through life. Suddenly, people who once laughed at your ideas start studying your mindset in silence. They become confused by your confidence because it does not come from status, popularity, or attention. It comes from self-awareness. That is something no system can easily control. Independent minds create their own path. They are harder to manipulate because they think critically before accepting information. They question narratives. They observe actions instead of blindly trusting words. And once a person reaches that level mentally, fear-based control begins losing its power completely. Now people feel unsettled around you because they sense your awareness. You are no longer reacting emotionally to every distraction placed in front of you. You understand the game too clearly now, and the system always fears individuals who can think for themselves, because once the mind becomes truly independent, it becomes impossible to fully control ever again. Most people believe pain only destroys a person. They think suffering automatically weakens the mind, breaks confidence, and leaves permanent damage behind. But what they fail to understand is that pain can also create transformation. In some people, pressure creates collapse. In others, it creates power. And somewhere along the way, you stopped allowing pain to define you emotionally and started using it as fuel mentally. That changed everything. Every betrayal taught you something valuable. Every disappointment sharpened your awareness. Every moment you were ignored, underestimated, or abandoned forced you to grow stronger internally. While other people became bitter and lost themselves completely, you began studying your own struggles like lessons instead of curses. You realized pain carries information. It reveals who truly stands beside you. When life becomes difficult, it exposes fake loyalty, weak character, and hidden intentions. Suffering opened your eyes to realities comfort could never teach. At first, the wounds felt unbearable. You questioned yourself during lonely nights. You replayed memories repeatedly in your mind, wondering why certain people treated you like you were nothing. You stayed silent while carrying emotional battles nobody else could see. And slowly, something dangerous started happening inside you. Instead of breaking permanently, your mind adapted to the pressure. Your emotions became more controlled. Your awareness became sharper. You stopped expecting fairness from the world and started understanding human nature on a deeper level. That is when pain stopped being weakness. It became psychological power. You learned how to stay calm during chaos because chaos had already lived inside your mind before. You learned how to read people because betrayal trained your instincts. You learned patience because suffering forced you to endure situations that would have destroyed less disciplined individuals. Every difficult season built another layer of mental armor around your spirit. Now people mistake your calmness for coldness, but they do not understand what it took to build that level of control. They never saw the internal wars you survived quietly. They never witnessed the moments when you felt completely isolated yet still chose to keep moving forward. Real psychological strength is not built through easy experiences. It is created through surviving situations that nearly break your soul while refusing to let darkness consume your identity completely. That is why your energy feels different now. Pain taught you how fragile most people truly are emotionally. You noticed how quickly others collapse under pressure because they spent their lives avoiding discomfort. Meanwhile, you became familiar with suffering. You learned how to function while carrying emotional weight. Discovered that resilience grows when escape is no longer an option. And because of that, fear stopped controlling you the same way. Once someone survives enough emotional storms, ordinary intimidation loses its effect. You stopped panicking during hard moments because you already know what survival feels like. You stopped depending on external validation because pain forced you to find strength within yourself. Even your silence changed. It no longer comes from insecurity. It comes from awareness. Now, when people try hurting you emotionally, it does not land the same anymore. Not because you became heartless, but because experience trained your mind to recognize manipulation quickly. You understand how people project their own weakness onto others. You understand how jealousy hides behind criticism and how insecurity often disguises itself as arrogance. That understanding became your advantage. Pain transformed your mindset into something deeper than ordinary confidence. It gave you emotional intelligence, patience, discipline, and psychological endurance. While others were busy running from discomfort, you were unknowingly becoming mentally stronger through every difficult chapter life forced you to survive. And now the same pain that once tried to destroy you has become the exact reason your presence feels impossible to break. People expected you to react quickly. They expected anger, emotional decisions, desperate revenge, or public breakdowns. They thought the pressure would eventually force you into making mistakes like everyone else. That is how most people operate. The moment life becomes difficult, they lose control of themselves. They expose emotions too early, abandon their vision halfway through the process, and destroy their own future because they cannot tolerate temporary discomfort. But you were different. You understood something most people never learn. Patience is not weakness. Patience is controlled power. It is the ability to remain disciplined while the world tries to provoke you into chaos. And that level of self-control frustrated people more than any emotional reaction ever could. At first, they underestimated your silence. They assumed you were passive because you did not immediately fight back. They thought you lacked confidence because you chose observation over impulsive reactions. But what they failed to realize was that patience gave you something emotions never could: clarity. While others acted emotionally, you studied timing. You watched people expose themselves naturally. You noticed how fake loyalty always collapses under pressure. You learned that insecure people eventually reveal their jealousy without needing confrontation. Instead of wasting energy proving yourself to everyone, you stayed focused on building quietly. And that confused people because society teaches instant gratification, not discipline. Most people want immediate results. They want recognition after one attempt. They want success without sacrifice. They want respect without consistency. But you understood that real power grows slowly. Trees with the deepest roots take the longest to grow. Strong minds are built through endurance, not shortcuts. So while everyone around you chased temporary attention, you stayed patient enough to build something permanent. That patience destroyed their expectations completely. People expected you to quit when progress became invisible. They expected loneliness to weaken you. They expected rejection to make you bitter. They expected delays to break your confidence. But every difficult season only strengthened your discipline instead. The longer success took, the more mentally dangerous you became. Because patience teaches emotional mastery, and emotional mastery separates powerful individuals from reckless ones. Most people cannot handle waiting. Waiting exposes insecurity. It forces people to confront their own doubts. That is why so many individuals sabotage themselves before reaching their full potential. They become impatient and abandon the process too early. But you learned how to survive uncertainty without collapsing mentally. You stayed committed even when nobody supported your vision. You kept moving forward while others laughed, doubted, and questioned your direction. That consistency became terrifying over time, because eventually patience always reveals who was truly serious. The people who mocked you disappeared the moment struggle appeared in their own lives. The people who pretended to be strong lost control under pressure. Meanwhile, you kept evolving quietly in the background. Every delayed victory increased your resilience. Every obstacle improved your focus. Every setback trained you to think long-term instead of emotionally. Now people look at you differently because your patience created results they cannot ignore anymore. The same individuals who once expected your downfall are now confused by your growth. They cannot understand how someone who faced so much resistance remained calm for so long. They expected emotional collapse, but instead they witnessed transformation. They expected frustration, but instead they saw discipline. And discipline is dangerous because disciplined people become unpredictable in the most powerful way possible. Patience gave you psychological advantage. While others wasted energy reacting to distractions, you preserved your focus. While they chased attention, you developed substance. While they sought comfort, you built endurance. That difference changes destinies over time. Small acts of discipline repeated consistently create massive separation between ordinary minds and extraordinary ones. Now your presence carries weight because people sense how much control you have over yourself. They realize you are no longer ruled by temporary emotions. You move with intention instead of impulse. You understand timing instead of forcing outcomes, and that destroys people's expectations because they assumed pressure would eventually break your spirit like it breaks everyone else. But your patience turned pressure into strength instead. And that is why the people who once underestimated you now watch carefully, wondering how someone they expected to fail became mentally untouchable right in front of them. At first, chaos looked like something designed to destroy you. Everything around you felt unstable, unpredictable, and unfair. People switched up without warning. Situations collapsed suddenly and plans you trusted fell apart in front of your eyes. Most people break in moments like that. They panic, they react emotionally, and they lose control of themselves because they depend on stability to feel safe. But your experience with chaos was different. Instead of running from it, you started adapting to it. And that is where everything changed. Chaos forced you to stop expecting life to be predictable. It removed your illusion of control and showed you how quickly things can shift without warning. At first it felt overwhelming, like everything you relied on was disappearing at once. But slowly, something inside you started adjusting. You began observing instead of reacting. You started analyzing instead of panicking. You realized that chaos is not just destruction, it is information. It reveals who you are when comfort is taken away. Most people only function well when life is calm. But you learned how to function when everything is falling apart. That is what made you dangerous. Because chaos trained your mind to stay active when others shut down. While people around you were losing emotional control, you were developing mental clarity. You stopped letting fear dictate your decisions. You stopped reacting to every emotional trigger. Instead, you learned how to pause, observe, and respond strategically. That shift turned your mindset from reactive to calculated. And calculated minds are always more powerful than emotional ones. Chaos also exposed people around you. It showed you who stays loyal when things get difficult and who disappears when life becomes unstable. It revealed hidden intentions, fake relationships, and fragile trust. You stopped being surprised by betrayal because chaos made patterns visible. Once you see enough instability, you begin understanding human behavior on a deeper level. You realize most people are not consistent, they are conditional. That awareness changed how you move. You stopped depending on others for emotional balance. You stopped expecting fairness from situations. You stopped assuming people would act logically under pressure. Instead, you built emotional resistance. You learned how to stay calm even when everything is uncertain. That calmness became your strongest advantage because it is rare in a world where most people collapse under pressure. Over time, chaos stopped feeling like punishment. It started feeling like training. Every unstable moment sharpened your instincts. Every unexpected setback improved your adaptability. Every emotional shock increased your awareness. You became comfortable in discomfort. And that comfort inside chaos is what separates ordinary minds from dangerous ones. Because when someone is no longer afraid of instability, they become unpredictable in return. People around you started noticing the change. They expected you to break under pressure, but instead they saw you becoming more controlled. They expected confusion, but they saw clarity. They expected emotional reactions, but they received silence and precision. That mismatch made them uneasy. Because people can understand someone who reacts emotionally, but they struggle to understand someone who remains calm while everything is collapsing. That is when your presence started carrying weight. Not because you became louder, but because you became harder to read. Chaos removed your emotional dependence and replaced it with strategic thinking. You stopped being influenced by temporary situations. You stopped making decisions based on fear. You stopped letting instability define your direction. Instead, you started using instability as raw material for growth. And that is what turned you into a dangerous force. Because now you do not fear unpredictable situations, you understand them. You do not panic when things go wrong, you adjust. You do not lose control when pressure rises, you become sharper. And people who can remain calm inside chaos are the ones who eventually start controlling outcomes instead of being controlled by them. Now when chaos enters your life, it no longer feels like destruction. It feels like opportunity. Because every time everything falls apart around you, you rebuild yourself at a higher level than before. And that continuous transformation is what makes your mindset something people cannot easily compete with, understand, or control. At one point, you were the one being overlooked, underestimated, and misunderstood. People moved past you like you were invisible, as if your presence carried no weight in their world. They spoke freely around you, made assumptions about you, and never imagined that the same person they ignored would one day become something they could no longer mentally dismiss. Back then, they thought you were just another face in the crowd, but they failed to realize that silent observation is often the beginning of transformation. You did not become powerful overnight. It was a gradual shift built through experience, patience, and internal evolution. Every moment you were ignored gave you time to understand people better. Every insult taught you how insecurity speaks. Every betrayal revealed how quickly loyalty disappears when pressure enters the picture. Instead of letting those experiences break you emotionally, you started storing them mentally as lessons. You stopped reacting to everything and started analyzing everything instead. That shift alone separated you from the way most people think and behave. While others were busy seeking validation, you were studying patterns. You noticed how people behave differently depending on who they are around. You saw how confidence in some individuals was only surface level, easily shaken when challenged. You realized that most respect in the world is conditional, not real. And once your awareness reached that level, your entire approach to life changed. You stopped trying to impress people who never understood you in the first place. You stopped explaining your silence. You stopped reacting emotionally just to prove your existence. That is where your transformation started becoming noticeable. At first, they thought your distance meant weakness or defeat. They assumed you were stepping back because you had nothing to offer. But in reality, you were stepping into something deeper. You were building strength in silence while they were busy entertaining noise. You were learning control while they were losing it. You were focusing on direction while they were distracted by opinion. And slowly, without announcing anything, your mindset began shifting into something more focused, more stable, and more aware than before. Then results started appearing. Not loud results, but undeniable ones. Subtle changes in how you carried yourself, a different level of calm in your reactions, a quiet confidence that did not seek approval. People who once spoke over you started pausing when you spoke. People who once ignored your opinion started listening carefully. Not because you demanded attention, but because your energy no longer matched the version of you they remembered. That shift created discomfort in them, because when someone changes without seeking permission, it challenges the assumptions others built about them. The version of you they believed they understood no longer existed. And that confusion slowly turned into awareness. They began to realize that you were no longer predictable. You were no longer easy to categorize. You were no longer someone whose reactions they could anticipate. Now your presence carries weight even in silence. When you enter a space, the energy shifts slightly. Conversations adjust. People become more aware of their words. The same individuals who once overlooked you now pay attention, even when you say nothing. That is not because you changed how loudly you speak, but because you changed how deeply you understand yourself. And that is what makes everything different. Now, because when a person grows internally beyond how others perceive them, their presence alone becomes enough to disrupt the comfort of those who once underestimated them. Now they do not just see you, they feel you. And that is why their whole world seems to shift the moment you step into it.